Jazzy music.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Alexis Volzy, and I am the sales executive with Ticor Title in our Clackamas office. Before we dive into today's class, I just wanted to take a few moments to introduce our team to you. We have offices and sales executives across the Portland Metro that are here and available to partner with you and help you with the growth of your business. And then, of course, we have our amazing escrow teams that are here to help make your transactions nice and smooth. We have 4 Portland locations: our Hillsborough office, Clackamas, downtown Portland, and Lake Oswego. So if you haven't had a chance to connect with someone from our team, we would love the opportunity to do so, to dive into your business and figure out what we can do to help you grow in 2024. I also wanted to mention our technology marketing specialist, Ryan Jacobson. He is here on the back end of today's call, making everything go nice and smooth, but he's also available to you as a resource. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about the BAC and the NAR settlement and how things are changing for your business with that. And as part of that, we want to make sure that your future clients and potential referrals can find you online. And Ryan is great for assisting with that. So he actually does online presence audits, and he will take a look at how you're showing up, give you personalized recommendations on what to improve and how to make sure you are being found. So if you scan that QR code, you can access his calendar, book a time to meet with him, and he can help you with that. Of course, you can also reach out to your sales executive and we can assist with that as well. All right, a few housekeeping things for today's class. We are in webinar mode, so we cannot see you or hear you. So if you have questions throughout the class, please go ahead and type those into the chat box or the Q&A section, and we will answer those as we go. We'll kind of answer them throughout the class, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end as well. If we don't get to everyone's questions today, we will be sending out the follow-up email with contact information for our speakers, so feel free to reach out to them and they can assist with that. Also, we are recording today's class, and we will be sure to send you a link of that recording as well in case there's anything that you want to refer back to. Today's class does qualify for 1 CE credit, so we will send out that certificate via email later on today or tomorrow morning. Please note that you do need to stay connected for at least 50 minutes in order to qualify for that credit. If you get disconnected, go ahead and log back in. Your time will accumulate. And on that note, if you are watching with someone else, please make sure everyone is logged in with their own unique link. That's how we track the attendance and make sure that you are staying connected. All right, well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our amazing panel that we have here today. We did this class last week and received great feedback from everyone who attended. So I'm really excited that we are here doing this again today, answering more questions and going over some of those same things. So I'm going to first start off by passing off to Evan Swanson with Guild Mortgage. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you, Ticor Title, for helping us host this. Obviously, where the industry is headed is going to be greatly impacted by this NAR settlement and the new laws and regulations that are coming to being. And more than ever, it's my belief that great leadership is going to be incredibly important for realtors if they're going to flourish and thrive in this new environment. And so when this announcement came out, I had a chance to connect with my friends. First off, Colleen Gordon, who is the principal broker at Keller Williams Realty Professional. She was also named the Masters Circle PMAR Principal Broker of the Year last year. So Colleen, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
And another friend, Jeremy Rogers, Director of Government Affairs for the Oregon Association of Realtors. Portland Business Journal named him one of the 40 under 40. I won't say how many years ago, but Jeremy is a great guy and one that is definitely helping lead the industry forward as these changes come into being. Jeremy, welcome and thank you for being here. And I believe you're going to read the antitrust statement from OAR.
Yeah, thanks so much, Evan. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and with Colleen, and who I also consider both of you friends and experts in the industry, and learned so much from the both of you last week when we did this session. So glad to be here again to do it again. So let me start off. We're talking about these lawsuits and settlements and commission issues, and it's just really important that we're all on the same page about what the conversation is focused on. And this isn't an Oregon Realtors meeting, but Oregon Realtors does have an antitrust compliance policy that I want to read off and that we should use to govern this meeting as well. So Oregon Realtors is a not-for-profit trade association devoted to improving business conditions for the real estate industry. Oregon Realtors meetings and events often include real estate professionals and other industry stakeholders who compete with each other or who work for competing businesses. Oregon Realtors is committed to conducting all meetings and events in a professional, ethical, and lawful manner, including an adherence to all antitrust laws. To that end, the topics for this meeting will focus on advancing the interests of real estate professionals and consumers of real estate services, increasing competition, reducing risk for all parties involved in real estate transactions, and sharing insights on business best practices. The following discussion topics are always prohibited: fixing, controlling, recommending, or suggesting the commissions or fees charged for real estate brokerage services; fixing, controlling, recommending, or suggesting the cooperative compensation offered by listing brokers to potential cooperating brokers; disparagement of competitors; limiting product or service offerings; allocating geographical territory or customers; and refusing to deal with any market participants. So any discussion that's inconsistent with this policy will not be tolerated today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. So, I mean, this is what this webinar is all about, is helping advance and move the industry forward. So in terms of format, I'm going to start off, I'm going to share some slides and talk a little bit about how we're dealing with these changes on the lending side. I'm then going to hand it over to Jeremy, who's going to talk about what the association is doing on a state level to help move the industry forward. And then Colleen is going to share, I think, how many times have you read the settlement now, Colleen? Are we in the teens yet?
No, I stopped at 8. 8 was good.
Okay, good. She's going to share some of the ways that she's advising realtors in her office moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right, everybody see that okay? So I think the first thing I want to mention is that with these changes, there's some things that don't change. And in our judgment, in the lending industry's judgment, it's still the duty of the loan officer or lender to clearly communicate the financial side of buying a home, including a complete disclosure of all settlement charges, which in some instances now might include a buyer representation fee. I think more than ever, it's going to be important that realtors have close alignment and partnerships with their lenders so that they are speaking together to inform buyers of these changes. Because the last thing you want to have happen is, have to have a buyer surprised or uncertain about their ability to pay the representation fee. And the best example I can give is that if you think about if you're on an airplane and you're on the tarmac before you've taken off, and you're sitting there and the pilot comes over the intercom and says, hey, we're flying to this destination. I've looked at the weather pattern, and an hour into the flight, the weather is showing that we're probably going to have some turbulence, right? And so you take off, you've started the flight, you're an hour in, and the plane starts to shake because of turbulence, right? What happens? Well, you're not worried, you're not concerned, because the pilot who you've inherently trusted your life with set the expectation before the flight that this was going to happen. Now, this is obviously not a do or die in buying a home, but the point is that the expectations, as long as it's set preemptively and professionally, then I don't believe realtors are going to have to worry about having awkward conversations with clients about the buyer representation fee. I want to go through and give you some examples of ways that we foresee buyers covering the buyer representation fee. First off, I think people are worried about this, but there's a lot of home buyers out there who have the money in addition to their down payment and standard closing costs to pay their representation. In fact, in January of this year, Realtor Magazine showed that we had the highest level of cash transactions in decades. About 32% of all homes bought nationwide in January were bought with cash. So clearly, if people are buying homes with cash, they probably also have money that they can pay a representation fee as well. Now, obviously, we're also going to talk to buyers, and keep in mind when we pre-approve a buyer, when we're going through these, we're actually going to outline these for each client so they understand how this is going to get paid. So the second option, of course, is that it might be that the listing agent has negotiated BAC as a part of that listing contract, so that for the home that you buy, the buyer representation fee will be paid either wholly or partially by the seller. We also know that there will be an opportunity to ask for that in the offer, right? So, a buyer has the ability, just like asking the seller to pay their standard closing costs, to also cover the cost of the representation fee. Now, this is an update from the webinar we did last Friday, but we all know that different loan programs and down payment levels have limitations on what the IPCs are, the interested party contributions. Since last Friday, the good news is FHA has come out and clarified that they will not be including a seller paid buyer representation fee as in the sum total against the IPC limit. In other words, a seller will be on an FHA transaction allowed to contribute up to 6% of the sales price towards standard closing costs and prepaids, and in addition to that, be able to cover the buyer's representation fee. Now, we haven't heard from FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency. They are the ones that oversee Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and help set those rules. They have not clarified if they're going to follow the same approach. But the industry experts that I've spoken to in the last few days have all indicated that they fully expect that FHFA will follow suit from FHA. This is particularly important for our conventional buyers who are putting less than 10% down, because the IPC limit is 3%, and we were concerned that those buyers wouldn't have enough money to cover their down payment, the settlement charges, and a buyer representation fee from the seller. So if the FHFA follows FHA's guidance, then the good news is the seller could contribute up to 3% of the sales price towards standard closing costs, and in addition, be able to cover the buyer representation fee. So I want to clarify that FHFA for conventional financing has not clarified that yet, but it's looking positive on that front. All right. So, and then lastly, if we do find a situation where either the buyer can't pay because they don't have the cash, the seller is not willing to negotiate or pay the buyer representation fee, the third option we're going to look at is redirecting down payment. So if a home buyer, for example, is approved with a 10% down payment, we could redirect 2.5%, if that's the buyer representation fee, to have that pay towards the fee, and then just adjust the down payment to 7.5%. Now, that does increase the monthly payments on the part of the home buyer, but it only increases the payments by about 3% of what it otherwise would have been. And so we want to make sure the buyer is equipped to know that option as well, in the event that it can't be negotiated and paid by the seller. Now, there are still some questions that we're waiting on. And one of the questions, of course, is will FHFA follow FHA's guidance on the seller paid buyer representation? The other big question we're waiting on is how VA is going to approach this, because up until now, VA has not allowed buyers to pay their real estate representation fee or commission. I do want to point out that VA does allow buyers to cover an appraisal gap. So, for example, if you were working with a VA buyer and they can't pay a buyer representation fee directly, that buyer representation fee could still be built into the purchase price and subsequently ask the seller to pay that amount. and the buyer could represent that they can pay that appraisal gap. So VA does allow a buyer to pay appraisal gap, but again, we do expect VA to change this guideline so that representation fees can be paid by the buyer moving forward. Conventional 10% down, we talked about that. And the next big question we have is for appraisals, because as we move farther along, the question remains as to whether or not it'll be market typical for sellers to cover buyers' representation fee. And if you talk to appraisers, so long as most homes pay a seller pays for a buyer's representation fee, it becomes market typical, and therefore it does not have to be included in the reconciliation page of an appraisal. But if we reach a point where it's sort of an uneven market and some homes are offering buyer representation fee compensation and some aren't, then we could enter a situation where the appraiser is technically going to have to reconcile values based on whether or not a seller paid a representation fee. And the problem with that is that now that the BAC field is being taken out of RMLS, which is where appraisers typically get that data, the question remains as to how they're going to know. And are they going to have to call or email realtors from previous transactions? And is that information going to be reliable? So I think there's a lot of questions that we're going to go into this regarding appraisals. Appraisers inherently look back. They're not very good about looking forward. I mean, that is an appraisal report. And so I'm not sure how proactive the industry is at this point, but obviously this will settle out with time. So the last thing is just, I think, a piece of advice. I think there's a lot of concern. I think there's a lot of fear out there about how a realtor is going to convey or communicate the value to a buyer at the point that they're getting that buyer representation agreement signed. And I would have you take this pilot and turbulence analogy further. If I were you, I would sit down and I would do a review of all the transactions that you've worked on in the past and look at all the turbulence that you've taken out of a real estate transaction for either a buyer or a seller. And by the way, if you don't have a lot of examples, Colleen probably has thousands. But we could absolutely be heading into a market where we're going to see a multi-tiered approach, right? We're going to have a full service, we're going to have a low cost. And by the way, this is the same sandbox that we play in as lenders, because we know that there are more full service lenders out there. There's definitely ones that provide a lot less service, maybe a little bit lower rate or fee, and it becomes the buyer's choice. And that's what we're heading into for real estate. The key is going to be to convey all the things that you can do to take the complexities in the turbulence out of the real estate transaction when you're at the point where you're asking the buyer to complete that agreement. So that's one thing I would just provide as advice moving into this market. And the last thing I'll say is, I forget who said it, but nothing's ever as good as it initially seems, and nothing's ever as bad as it initially seems. The market for real estate advice consulting, it's gonna remain. Buying a home is an extremely complex project. And just like people hire people to do their taxes, invest their money, get medical input, they're going to rely on professionals. The market will exist and we will adapt. So that's all I've got for now. I'm going to toss it over to my friend Jeremy. And Jeremy, can you talk to us? I know you've been doing a lot of these across the state to help realtors move forward and figure out how to navigate. Share with us how the association is helping the industry move forward with these new rules.
Hey, thanks, Evan, and great job with your presentation and your comments. I think they were spot on. And and for those who don't know me, Jeremy Rogers with the Oregon Realtors. But the thing, I like your analogy on the plane and the turbulence and the pilot. And everyone who's been in a plane knows that you're correct. They feel a lot better when you hit that turbulence if they've been warned by the pilot about it, because they know what's going on. But also sometimes the turbulence isn't as bad as the pilot said it might be, and sometimes it doesn't really happen at all. And so, we don't really know, but being prepared for anything is what we need to do right now. But I think at the end of the day, if folks take the time to get prepared, they're going to find that, the changes are not as dramatic as they may think they are. and that the tools available to make sure that both buyers and sellers are, getting what they need and represented well in the market are out there, regardless of what rule changes come forward. So I just want everyone to take a deep breath and know that they're going to get through this. And we at the association are doing everything we can to help our members get there. So one thing I'm going to share in the chat a link to a page, and let me make sure it's going to everyone. And I encourage folks to pull that up. That page that we've created, OregonRealtors.org/BBA, that's a hub that we have for all of these issues we're talking about today, getting prepared for the outcomes of the settlement. First thing I want to say is that the settlement's not final. It's a draft settlement or a proposed settlement, has to be approved by the court. And then ultimately, even if it is approved by the court, NAR would have to actually write the rules that would be governing the conduct of the MLSs and the members. And until those rules are written, we don't actually have the language that is governing our conduct. So some of it is speculation. But based on what was agreed to in the proposed settlement, we have a pretty good idea of what that's going to look like. So really, first, I just want to kind of break it down for people so they can understand what potential changes are coming. There's really two sets of changes, one around cooperative compensation, one around the use of written agreements with buyers. On the cooperative compensation side, the main thing to know is that cooperative compensation offers are going to be completely removed from the MLS. They're not going to be a part of the MLS. Not only is it not going to be required that a cooperative compensation be communicated, it will not be allowed to be communicated through the MLS. However, cooperative compensation is not prohibited generally, so it's still something that a listing agent and a seller could agree on that they want to provide, but they would not be able to communicate it through the MLS or any other mechanism that's trying to aggregate those. They'd just be able to communicate it related to their own listing. On the buyer side, the use of a written agreement with buyers. Oregon already passed a law here in the short legislative session, House Bill 4058, that was going to require the use of written representation agreements with buyers by January 1, 2025. So really, the NAR proposed settlement just accelerates that timeline by about 6 months. But I think the big change that folks need to understand is that the professional service fee for the buyer side is going to be set by the buyer and their agent and the buyer representation agreement. There is not the proposed settlement creates no limitations on the ability of the listing side, whether it be the listing broker in coordination with their client or the seller directly through the sale agreement, contributing to pay for all or some of that professional service fee on the buyer side. Okay. It just that wouldn't be able to be communicated through the MLS, and the buyer side agent would not be able to accept compensation in excess of what they agreed to in the buyer rep agreement. So it really is buyer side setting the fee on the buyer side, but still having plenty of tools to get help from the listing side. In terms of what we're doing to help folks get ready, if you go to that webpage that I put in there, we have lots of great information, like in terms of FAQs, helping you understand what this settlement is and is not about, what the particulars are, some, answers to a lot of questions, like some of the ones that you raised today, Evan, around the financing of the buyer side commissions and how that's going to play out with interested party contributions. As you mentioned, we're still waiting to hear something from FHFA on that, but we do have more information on that on our website. We have handouts that you can use with your clients. Now, I want to make clear the handouts that we have on there, which we have a great handout that explains what cooperative compensation is, why it may or may not want to be offered on the listing side. On the buyer side, what is a buyer representation agreement? Why would a buyer want to sign one? If a buyer does sign one and they owe their agent a fee, what tools do they have to ask the listing side to actually pay for that? So that's all in a 2-page handout that you could use as a guide to help your client understand these choices that the two of you will be making together. It's that handout is geared for this current moment we're in. Once those NAR rules come out, there'll probably be some tweaks to it, but for the moment we're in now, it's a really great tool. We've also updated our forms for Oregon Realtors to make it easy for a buyer to ask a seller to contribute to the buyer agent fee as a concession on the sale agreement. And so in our sale agreement, we have a little checkbox for that now. And then that directs you to an addendum where the parties can lay out the terms of that and instruct escrow to make that payment. And the buyer agent signs off on it as well to accept that payment from escrow. So we've got that covered. Again, once the new NAR rules come out, we'll probably make some additional tweaks to that as well. We've got webinars that we've done with expert principal brokers from around the state, helping walk through this and explaining both in terms of the settlement, but also in terms of strategies to talk with your client about using a buyer representation agreement, ways to talk about your value. We've got great handouts as well on that very issue. A lot of those come from NAR, but I can't remember the number, 100 and some odd ways to talk to your buyer about your value, and then another one with 100 more ways. So there's a lot of good information that your realtor associations are putting out to help you navigate this. And what we want you to know is that we're here for you. So if there's something we're not providing, if there's a question that isn't on the FAQs that you want answered, if there's a tool in a forum that you think would help you that we haven't created yet, just tell us, and assuming it's reasonable, we'll create it, right? We are here for you to help you navigate this. So that's the main message I want people to take away.
Thanks, Chairman. And you've participated in a lot of these conversations so far, and you've probably seen a lot of questions that have been fielded. And I guess, could you comment, what do you think the biggest misconception is right now about what the industry is going to look like in the next few months as these rules take effect?
Yeah, I think people are overly they're assuming that the rules on cooperative compensation sweep broader than they actually do, and assuming that there are not tools available for the listing side to help the buyer side pay for that agent commission. And so, as you talked about, and as I've already talked about, and as a lot of those documents on our website talk about, those tools are available. There's two tools: cooperative compensation, meaning coming from the listing agent to the buyer's agent, so long as that decision was made in conjunction with the seller, okay, still allowed, as well as direct from the seller as part of the sale agreement. So I think people don't understand that well enough. So that's one. And then, you know, I'm hearing less. I think, you know, a year ago when there was a lot of talk about moving towards buyer representation agreements, you know, a lot of people expressing concerns, but honestly, I'm hearing less, you know, fewer concerns about that, because I think we've been talking about it for so long. Oregon has passed a law. We were already starting to get ready for that. You know, I think one of the trickier questions that I think we're still fleshing the answer out to is the ones around, you know, will buyers more often now go directly to seller or seller's agent? And if so, what are the fine lines between dual or disclosed limited agency representation and versus like a listing agent just representing the seller and working with an unrepresented buyer? And I think, you know, that's an important conversation to have if in fact we do find ourselves in a place where more buyers are going directly to listing agents. And that's something that we plan to flesh out a bit more, provide some more guidance on, talk with the real estate commissioner, hopefully, you know, be great for OREA to put out some additional guidance on that as well. Because that is something we're hearing a lot about.
Great. Thank you, Jared. One more question before we get to Colleen here. I think there's a lot of frustration right now about the media blitz. The media has obviously taken this and run. I think they've controlled the narrative for the general public. And obviously it's painted, you know, real estate brokerage in a poor light, frankly. And I know you're a part of OAR, you are not a part of NAR, but just curious about anything the state is doing, and are you aware of any activity being done at the NAR level to help kind of PR and help get that media story in a little bit more positive light?
Yeah. So look, I know that people are frustrated, myself included, you know, with the media coverage, and it's really been a disservice to the public because the factual inaccuracies in the reporting have been pretty mind-boggling. You know, enough so to make me kind of question, should I really trust the other things that I've read that I know less about? Because this is something I actually know quite a bit about, and the reporting was just factually incorrect. And including as we've talked about today, the thing that people really want to know and talk about and understand, and the implications are around buyers being able to pay that fee. And that's not been part of the conversation at all in the media, right? So, but NAR has since, and I think, look, I'm not making excuses or defending their communication strategy. I think that, they were negotiating a settlement, right? And they had to keep things pretty close to the vest. I also think that the word about the settlement got out a little bit sooner than folks had planned. And so, maybe they were just a little bit behind on that. But you're starting to see now a lot of activity. There's been some great op-eds, that I'm receiving in the NAR emails I get that have been out there really explaining what this actually means, talking about the value of a real estate agent, in particular on the buyer side, and helping to calm down some of these kind of fantastical and extraordinary statements that are being made about this settlement, and getting down to what it really means. So I think that's happening on the NAR side. They're also hosting calls with the communications directors from all the states regularly, so they can coordinate on that. We're working on our own steps and plans. It's a bit of a, we want to help with that. At the same time, like the news cycle on this kind of happened 2 weeks ago, and you don't want to keep dragging out the news cycle on something forever. So we're trying to do what we can, but recognizing it isn't our settlement. Most of the press has actually been national press. But I do think that the tide is turning on that, including like other experts weighing in. I mean, you're starting to just see economists writing their own op-eds and weighing in and saying, like, the stuff that you've heard about this is completely inaccurate. And so I think that will happen. You always have this rush where everyone wants to freak out and, frame it as this David versus Goliath thing. But then the more reasonable minds who actually read it and understand it start coming forward. And, I think by the time it actually goes into effect in July, there will have been plenty of time for the narrative to get corrected. So
that's awesome. Well, Jeremy, I want to commend you and just express gratitude to the leadership at OAR, including yourself. I mean, you guys have been ahead of the curve, if you think about it, working towards policy like required buyer representation, even before these rules are gonna, require states to do so if they haven't done already. And again, I think during moments of change, leadership is so critically important to the success of the industry. You're a big part of that, buddy. So thank you for all your hard work, and appreciate you guys being a part of this.
Can I
Colleen.
chime in? Oh, sorry. There's a question I thought might be good for Jeremy to answer, if that's okay, real quick.
Yep.
So the question says, do we see Oregon matching Washington in terms of the seller paying the BAC to the buyer's brokerage as opposed to the listing brokerage paying the BAC? Does that make sense?
Yeah, again, I think, well, first of all, part of that is like how MLS sets it up, or MLS rules, and cooperative comp's going away from the MLS. Okay. So I think we've kind of moved on from that. That was a conversation that I think was quite relevant up until the settlement, but we've kind of moved on from that now. And I think going forward, because it's not going to be something that's described in the MLS, it's really up to the seller and the listing agent to do it either way. They can set up a listing agreement that includes a cooperative comp where the seller is paying a certain amount to the listing agent, and then the listing agent has permission from the seller to provide a portion of that to the buyer's agent. Or they can set it up without that built in, but just with a willingness to have a conversation about that with the buyer and the buyer's agent, and this, and later on decide to do it either way, as a portion of the agent's compensation or as directly from the seller. So I don't think there's any thing in the settlement that really limits that. It could happen either way. It'll be a choice for a listing agent and a seller to make. And that's a choice that they can make upfront with the amount, or it's a choice that they can just talk about when they sign a listing agreement, be prepared for, and then entertain it once it comes as a request from the buyer side.
Great. There's several questions in here, all based around if the seller is offering a BAC, how is that going to be communicated if it can't be listed in MLS? I don't know if that's good for you to touch on, Jeremy, or if Colleen, you want to talk about that at some point. But
I think
there's a lot of confusion.
I know that. I think that's on Colleen's agenda.
Okay.
So And I
Perfect.
just want to say, if you do have questions, Christian, I see your question, Cheryl. We do have some questions. These will be monitored and answered before the webinar is out. If additional questions come in, post them to chat or post them to Q&A. We'll monitor that. So Colleen, it's when this whole thing started, the NAR settlement got announced. I actually had realtors that I was talking to who know that you and I are friends, and they were actually asking me, hey, what's Colleen saying about this whole topic? You are so well respected in the industry, and the realtors that work in your office are so fortunate to have you and your guidance and wisdom at this moment of time. Thank you for taking the time to join us on this webinar and spread your knowledge to a broader base. I know you've read the settlement 8 times, you're tapped out, you probably have it memorized now. What's most striking to you, and where's your focus? I know that your thought has evolved throughout this process. What are you thinking about now as we move forward?
Well, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is we're still very much in reactionary mode right now to the initial announcement of the settlement. And a lot of the reaction that comes has been emotional for us. We've been challenged on our integrity, on our professionalism. Our entire profession has been skewered in the press. And it's funny, as time has passed since the settlement was proposed settlement was first announced, we're starting to see the tone change. Like Jeremy mentioned, we're hearing housing experts chiming in and saying it's not as severe as everybody's making it out to be. Even Inman, great article this morning. Well, I haven't finished it, so before I give them credit for a great article, great headline, how great agents win in the face of NAR settlement misinformation. Right, so there's an acknowledgement now that a lot of the information that went out in the beginning was wrong. And I think the biggest challenge we'll have as realtors is that mainstream media isn't going to correct their misinformation. That is not what's going to get people to click on their news articles and subscribe to their publications. It's the dramatic headlines that got the attention. So mainstream media isn't going to help us educate our clients that the media got it wrong. That our clients are not reading Inman, Riz Media, Housing Wire. Those are industry publications that we read. And so the challenge is going to be on us to get the correct information out there, to do what we've always done, which is to guide our clients through the home buying and home selling process, even as that process is evolving. For us to do that, though, we have to know the facts. We can't rely on what we read in the media, what we hear at the water cooler, what we hear from people in ancillary businesses and how they think it's going to impact the industry. We need to know the facts. And so that's why, I mean, we joke, I've read the settlement agreement 8 times. And for those of you that haven't read the full 108-page settlement, you don't have to get the true facts. So NAR's actually put together a website. It's facts.realtor, super simple URL, and hopefully somebody can throw that in the chat because I can't type and talk at the same time. But on that website, they have a summary overview. They have a timeline of what we can anticipate for the future events, including the court process to review the proposed settlement. And if approved, what does the rollout of that settlement need to look like? So there's facts available to us. We need to make sure we're going to the right sources for the information that we're going to help guide our clients with. Somebody had asked about publication, a NAR campaign to try to correct the misinformation. NAR's actually put together a campaign that we as realtors can be using. It's on that same website, facts.realtor, and there's a toolkit there with social media graphics that you can actually set a schedule to start going out on your own social media where your clients get information regarding the real estate industry to hear the true facts. That's already built for you. It's plug and play. It's an option if you choose to do it. I would love to see the realtor community flood the internet, the facts, because we all have databases who are following us on social media. Let's get the facts out there. Let's take control of the narrative again, because we're not going to rely on the news to do that for us. The other thing that I think is really important is that we are being questioned on the value that we bring in a transaction. And it is so critical, even without the settlement. We knew that we were heading towards a change in our industry in Oregon, where buyers, in order to have representation from a realtor, need to sign a buyer representation agreement. The same requirement we've had to represent a seller was already going to exist in Oregon starting January 1st, 2025. Which means buyer's agents who have relied on the process of networking, connecting, and building rapport with a buyer to just trust that they're going to see it through to the end and you're going to earn a commission, that's evolving now. You need to be able to articulate your value and explain the compensation. I think this is a huge opportunity. I've always wondered why buyer's agents are so willing to accept whatever it is the seller defines as the value for their services. This is our chance as buyer representatives to explain to the buyer the value our representation will bring in the home buying process for them, how we can protect and promote their interests to negotiate the best possible terms for them.
Great.
So work on your value proposition.
Colleen, there's thank you for that. There's a lot of questions. I mean, it feels like as we move into the summer and whenever these rules take effect, we don't know exactly when that's going to be yet. But it feels like there's still likely to be a fair amount of sellers that are going to offer, buyer representation fees, BAC. But it can no longer be communicated. It will no longer be able to be communicated in the RMLS. There's a lot of questions about how that can be communicated. And I'm wondering if you can comment, based on your understanding at this particular point in time, how do you expect any seller BAC to be communicated if it's not going to be an RMLS?
So the answer to that question is a little simpler than the complexity of the question. The only thing we know right now is what we can't do in terms of promoting a buyer agent commission. And that is to put it anywhere in the MLS system. So it can't be in the private remarks. It can't be in a field specific for buyer agent commission. Now, if the seller's offering concessions, the MLSs may be able to create a field that has an offering of concessions that could be inclusive of that buyer agent compensation that's being offered. But what hasn't been addressed in the settlement is whether or not the seller or the listing agent can put an offer of compensation on the property flyer, on the agent's website, a sticker on the post sign in the front yard of the property saying that at the list price, the seller is offering to pay a buyer agent compensation of this much. There are still going to be options, but because the people who will be writing the rules and giving us the direction on the implementation of the settlement haven't even developed the rules yet, it's a little hard for us to define a clear path on what direction we're going. Unlike House Bill 4058, we saw it go through the legislative process. We knew the likelihood of it passing. We've been able to kind of be proactive in what that's going to look like. To Jeremy's point, OR was able to adapt their forms, their buyer representation forms, already in alignment with House Bill 4058. OREF, as soon as House Bill 4858 passed, did the same thing. We've been working on adapting our buyer representation agreement for compliance to that. So we've had the ability to be able to have forward thinking in what the plan is going to be like well before January 1st, when the new law goes into effect. We're at a different time frame with this settlement agreement. We're at the mercy somewhat of the court. Before they respond to the settlement agreement, we need to know if they're going to accept it. If they are, what changes do we need to make in our processes from the MLS rules that are delivered by NAR, the Realtor Code of Ethics? Will we see changes there? there's a lot of background stuff that still needs to be done before we can have that clear path defined.
It's interesting, right? Because I mean, in all the things I had read leading up to the announcement of the settlement, the RMLS prohibition of marking BAC, that was not on the radar for anyone, I don't think. And so I think that's why there's a lot of questions around that. But again, it sounds like we have to wait for the rules to actually be created. There's questions in here, for example, is if the BAC can be advertised outside of RMLS, for example, on a neighboring website, can a link to that just be added to the private remarks? And again, we're just going to have to wait, right, until the rules are played out.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And Evan, can I jump in with a comment on this one, if that's
Yep.
okay? Because I think it's important for people to kind of shift their thinking a little bit around the cooperative compensation, because the professional service fee for the buyer's agent will be set in the buyer representation agreement. The proposed settlement also says that the buyer's agent would not be able to accept any cooperative compensation or any compensation from the seller side, in excess of that, what was agreed to in the agreement. And so it may be that a listing agent and a seller want to offer a blanket offer of compensation amount and communicate it in a way other than the MLS. But it may also be that they would want to do an up to amount, or it may be that they want to do hey, we're open to that negotiation if the other side needs that help to get the deal done, but we're not going to agree to the amount right now, right? So I just think people need to think broadly about all of the options that are available to get a transaction done, and also the likelihood that your forms, wherever you get them, are going to be updated to allow for that wide variety of choices to be made, including listing agreements and buyer representation agreements and sales agreements and the like.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeremy. I think there's a question of transition here as well. And to be clear, we do not know when these rules take effect yet, right? We think it's probably going to be July, August, but a specific date has not been set. Is that correct? So with regard to that transition period, I mean, presumably there will be active inventory listings that are in RMLS. And if they've been in RMLS prior to the rule change, then clearly BAC is going to be listed. Do we have any indication from RMLS on how they're going to handle that? Or is that just going to go away? Is a listing agent going to have to renegotiate or re-sign that listing at that particular point in time? Or do we know how that's going to go, the transition period?
I don't know that the MLSs even know yet, because they haven't received the rules that will need to be followed under the NAR instructions regarding MLS. So they're still waiting for the information so that they can start implementing change on their end as well. So it could be as simple as an addendum to modify an existing listing contract. It could be a whole new listing contract that's required. We don't know what the back-end technology changes are going to be in terms of how the listing appears to the public and to the co-op brokers in the system. We're still at that point where the people who need to implement those changes are still learning what the changes need to be so that they can figure out the how. And so until we got that foundational knowledge of what exactly has to change and what direction do we need to go, the creativity of how do we work with it, around it, or through it can't even be fathomed right yet, because there's so many different directions it could potentially go.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about that, because I think amendments are an important part of the topic here. And one of the questions I've heard come up in different meetings and conversations we've had around this is the ability of a listing realtor to amend or change the listing agreement to potentially offer BAC or presumably unoffer BAC. But also a buyer's agent. So what happens if there's a buyer representation agreement that is established, and let's just say hypothetically it's 2.5%, and the buyer starts their home search, and for whatever reason things don't go as initially planned? what's your understanding of the ability of a realtor to amend existing agreements in this new environment?
Well, I'm sorry. You want under
I was gonna
contract
say Jeremy.
under contract law, you can always amend an agreement, and there's nothing in Oregon real estate licensing law that prevents you from doing that. But we haven't seen the NAR rules yet, so we don't know if there's anything in the NAR rules or code of ethics updates that would put any limitations on that. So I think we're waiting, we'd be waiting to see. But I mean, certainly, like, and I can't imagine NAR writing any rule that would prevent, like, if you're on the representing a buyer and you're trying to get a deal done and your buyer owes you a certain amount, and to get the deal done, you want to drop your fee a little bit to help smooth it out, like, you guys have freedom to contract, and you can do that, And on the listing side, if you enter a transaction with the seller saying, I need to think more about whether I'd be willing to help the buyer side out, or let's just do it in the context of the particular transaction, and then they decide later on, let's do it, you could update the listing agreement. But again, could there be some elements of an NAR rule that put some limitations on things that you could do? Perhaps, but until we see it, it's just speculation.
I mean, in the lending industry, right? If we issue a loan estimate and we tell the borrower these are the fees, then there's regulations that govern, unless there's a change of circumstance, the fees can't change, or they can change within like a 10% variance. So it would seem to me that there would absolutely be the ability for a realtor to say, hey, I'll take less. What'll be interesting to see is if, there's a buyer representation fee that's signed at, let's say, 2%, buyer makes an offer where the seller's offering 2.5%. What's a realtor do in that situation? Okay, so a few other questions. I mean, let's try to speculate a little bit here on one of the things I'm very curious about is we know that this particular rule change potentially has an adverse impact on lower down payments, first-time home buyers, communities that we typically want to promote and help achieve homeownership, and it seems like this is probably a level of barrier in some cases. Given that, and given the fact that we expect that both Fannie and FHA are going to allow a seller to pay a buyer representation fee, do you think first-time home buyers are going to be negatively impacted, or might this just be kind of the media fear around all this? And if do you foresee listing agents having those conversations, almost like a multi-tiered approach or segmented market? If you're a first-time home buyer price point, it really becomes a listing agent's responsibility to educate that seller of the importance of offering BAC. So just speculating, like, how do you see these rule changes impacting first-time home buyers and home ownership opportunities?
Go for it.
Sorry, we're both waiting to see who would talk. I think there's still so much that remains to be seen. And a lot of it, I think we as realtors can start preparing now in skilling up in how we explain these changes to both buyers and sellers. For a seller who's selling a property that falls under a first-time home buyer price point, wouldn't it be in their benefit to have 7,000 plus realtors in the Portland metro area helping them find the buyer for their home? The wider pool of buyers that we can get for exposure on that is going to be a benefit. So by offering that buyer agent compensation, we're now essentially leaning in on all of the other realtors in town to help get your home sold. I think that's going to become an important conversation to be able to have with sellers of the price point for first-time home buyers. So our move-up sellers who are ready for their next home. Also, just explaining that really, in the end, the amount that's being paid isn't changing really. It's just when the payments are being made. If you think about it, if you sold the house, you paid a 6% fee. Or 5%, sorry, using example terms, but if you are paying that as a seller at the time of selling, when you go to buy, you are actually not paying any of it. With the change, a seller would only be paying their portion and a buyer would be paying their portion. So if you are selling and then buying, we're still going to be paying the same amount in realtor fees.
Oh,
Right. Go ahead, Jeremy.
thanks, Colleen. And yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think one of the most important things is going to be the ultimate decision by FHFA about whether they're going to consider these IPCs or not. But independently of that, the situation where I still would believe, even if they're not IPCs, where it still could be a disadvantage to a lower income buyer or just anyone who needs this listing side to pick up the fee, right, is in a situation where if you have a blanket unilateral offer that goes to everyone, including the cash buyer, right, then that's sort of an equal playing field for everyone. But in a situation where a cash buyer is saying, I actually can just pay my agent myself, then obviously that's a better offer than, it's already a better offer as a cash buyer, but it's additionally a better offer now because they can pay their own agent's fee and don't need to ask the other side to do that. So I do think there's a bit of an inherent disadvantage that comes to people who would need help from the listing side to pay the buyer agent fee that comes along with this. But I'll also admit, I'm an attorney and I do government affairs, but I'm not out there in the market. So I may be speaking out of turn a bit with that comment, but that's how I see it.
Great.
And
Thank you.
I hop off for another event, but I really appreciate you having me here today.
Jeremy, thanks for being here, buddy. Good to see you again.
See you, Jeremy.
Take care.
One other question for you, Colleen, talking about market segmentation is on the flip side, if we talk about the luxury market, right? The argument's been made in the media that it doesn't require that much more work or that much more representation to sell a $500,000 home than it does $1.5 million home. And I've heard different perspectives from different ways, but what's your perspective on that? Do you foresee there being kind of a bifurcated market in terms of BAC being offered based on the price point and the segmentation of the market?
I think there's the potential for that, but again, I go back to realtors skilling up in defining their value proposition to their client and their negotiation skills. It isn't just about the value that you provide, but your ability to negotiate, not just for your client, but for yourself as well. So when you're negotiating a buyer representation agreement or a listing contract, you're defining the compensation for your services. Are you prepared to articulate why that number is what it is?
Great. Well, I think we've answered all the questions in the chat and the Q&A. If anyone has any other questions, they're welcome to post it in there now. I understand, Colleen, we need to wish you a happy birthday today.
Thank you, Evan.
Assist to Dick Nickel there for making us aware of that.
Thank
Happy
you,
birthday
Dick.
to Colleen. Right on. Well, without any further questions, I want to say thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Tycor Title, for helping us put this on. And again, just want to reiterate that I think the fundamental value of a realtor persists through all these changes. The reality is sellers and buyers are going to need help in navigating the complicated transaction that is real estate. I think the number one value or number one skill that we need to all brush up on is being able to convey that in advance and not letting buyers and sellers strictly be, enter into a transaction without proper representation that could actually end up costing them more money. So Colleen, happy birthday. Thank you. Any closing thoughts from you?
No, I just make sure you get the facts. Don't rely on the news to educate you.
Awesome. Alexis, you want to bring us home?
Yes, thank you so much to all of our panelists today. There was already some great feedback in the comments just about how much great information was shared today. Again, we will be sending out a recording, a link to the recording of today's class, as well as contact information. So if you think of questions afterwards, feel free to reach out. Also, feel free to share that link with anyone who wasn't able to be here today, but you think might find this information useful. So thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you to our panelists. Again, keep an eye out for your CE certificate. Sometimes it does go to the spam or junk folder. So if you're not seeing it, reach out to us and we will be happy to resend it to you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.